Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What is going on?
Not a whole lot. We're been a little while since we had our last show. Took a little break. Got our batteries recharged, and diving into part 2 of a topic that we explored a couple months ago. It is looking at the regular season champion, and I guess we're sort of throwing out a what-if scenario here as to what if the playoffs didn't exist, or what if you prefer, what if we decided that the regular season was as or more important than the postseason. So we're declaring the champion based on the regular season standings and see how that throws off NBA history.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun exercise if you didn't catch our first episode, and it was very well received too, which is cool because we thought it was a really cool concept as well, and it seemed like everybody, the listeners, really enjoyed it as well. But yeah, it's just kind of a way to kind of look differently at NBA history in a way that, like, hey, if the playoffs never happened, and if it just, whoever was the best regular season team, if they got the rings, how would that sort of change some legacies, change some histories, change a lot of stuff? And a little caveat that we mentioned on the first show is that, like, we can't retroactively be like, oh, well, LeBron James won, a title in Cleveland, so now he's not going to leave and go to Miami. Like, you're going to still see that sort of course, these player movements are going to happen. We can't actually change NBA history, but it is still fun to kind of see that and see the scenarios that play out by using regular season records instead of just the postseason. So it's made for a fun exercise, and we're going to wrap it up here and then actually look at all time, like, teams that lost titles, teams that still have not gotten any titles, teams that benefited tremendously from this exercise. So it'll be cool to see how that all kind of wraps up.
Yeah, so we're referring to the regular season championship as a pennant, borrowing a baseball concept for those who did not listen to the first show and are confused if we throw around that term. That's what we mean. And yeah, and as Rich talked about, yes, we are aware that if this were really the way that things had happened, it would change a whole lot of other things. But we just like to save it for this because that would introduce too many variables into it, which would we'd be here for 30 hours talking about it, more than that probably. So no one wants that. So. We are going to begin with 1980, the beginning of the Bird Magic era, and I guess usually, of course, Magic is thought of as the ultimate winner of those battles, but we're going to still see here at the moment that is going to be changing a little bit.
Yeah, Boston finally gets the title. Geez, these guys have been waiting for so long here. But yeah, Boston gets the title here in 1980. They have a record of 61-21. They were 7.37 in SRS, which is tops in the league as well, which is a new champion, though, which is pretty cool here. So they kind of they get the first leg up on the Lakers here. Just to kind of give you an idea of other teams as well. The Lakers, they're 60-22, so they finished just out of the lead there. And Philadelphia, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, they were 59-23, so right there on the on the cusp. But yeah, this is Bird, Tiny Archibald, Dave Cowens, Cedric Maxwell, Pete Maravich, so it's a pre-Parrish and pre-McHale Boston Celtics team that gets the title here, so, which is kind of cool because it's kind of the blend of, and we talked about in our first episode of Dave Cowens getting his title in our exercise, and in here, he gets a title, his second one with his Celtics team, and then Bird, of course, gets his first one and kind of kickstarts that dynasty, quote unquote, and we'll see how it kind of plays out through the rest of the 80s as well.
Yeah, and a couple of other notes. Yeah, as you talked about, this is actually Boston's first championship since 1973 because that was their last regular season championship. And Kareem, although he does not win here, he did get a championship in 1977 with the Lakers. So his third pennant of the 70s. But there are not going to be as many coming as we move forward. And into 1981, we had a tied record of 62-20 between the 76ers and the Celtics. The tiebreaker goes to the Sixers, who had a better SRS, so we have a new champion of 1981. And, of course, this Philly team, you got Julius Erving, you got Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, Bobby Jones, and Darryl Dawkins. And Billy Cunningham, after getting a title as a player, now has a title as a coach, so keeps racking up those championships. And Boston denied a back-to-back championship, and the Lakers, much like this regular season, also don't much like this postseason would happen in real life, don't quite do it this year.
No, they don't. But 82 we go now for the next year. Boston, once again, the champion. So they're just barely denied via the tiebreaker. A three. I don't want to pay Mr. Pat Riley. So three titles in a row thing repeat.
Yeah.
Boston, they finally get back to the top after having to wait an entire year. Bird wins another title early in his career. So it's kind of interesting as well. By 82, Bird's already got 2 titles in this little exercise here. So that's a pretty interesting way to look at it. And this is the Boston team that we're used to now. You got Parrish, you got McHale. tale. And of course, Jason's favorite player in history, Danny Ainge, finally gets his ring, the first of, unfortunately, many, Jason. But
Ainge! Yes. So, and as you note, Bird now has 2 championships early on in his career, and Magic so far has a 0. So that little flip there, of course, in NBA history. 1983 proceeds as it did in real life. The 76ers adding Moses Malone win 65 games, first in the league. This is Julius Erving's second NBA pennant in addition to his 1 ABA pennant. So still the same number of rings, just got them in a different way than unfolded in his actual career.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that changes a little bit for Irving. I think, I don't know, for whatever reason, this way just seems a little bit more like I don't know. Yeah, like I feel like he'd be more well received. It's not that Julius Erving isn't very well received or whatnot, but I don't know that people consider him like an all-time winner. Whereas this, in this little exercise that we look at here, you might be able to make a better case for it than you do in real life. But yeah, not that that's a case that I really like to hear from anybody. But I've heard it and I get it that like maybe amongst the Birds and the Magics or whatnot of the '80s, he gets his few ones there. But yeah, it just feels like he's a little bit more of a winner in this exercise. Does it feel the same way for you too?
Yeah, I mean, the NBA accomplishments are always weighed by a certain crowd. A lot of historians a little bit more heavily than the ABA accomplishments are, just because the history of the league's more familiar. We've seen more, and the 80s are a much more known time than the 70s in a lot of respects. So I think those all are happening. In real life, Irving was older than Magic and Bird. So at this point, he's not quite as good as those guys were. Because they're just really emerging into their prime. Both of those guys also happen to be historically great at a very young age, and Irving's like 8-10 years older than those guys were. So it's he was a different point in his career. He wasn't going to be quite as dominant, even though he still was, a great player, up until this point. But he was, a level below them at this point during the time. Overall, it's kind of a different thing. But I definitely think the perception is that way, and it might change a little bit given the fact that he, gets another ring in the NBA.
Speaking of another ring, 1984, the same champions, the Boston Celtics, went with a 62-20 record. They were also tops in the league in SRS at 6.42. They had Dennis Johnson, which is a huge addition both in real life and in this exercise. And yeah, it's pretty simple. They win the title again. So.
Yeah. 3 out of 4, as we so certainly, or I'm sorry, 3 out of 5 championships, and a tied for a first place finish as well. So definitely very elite up there. 1985, it continues with 63 wins. They are actually they had a better SRS than the previous year, but they were 3rd in the league. Milwaukee was your number 1 team in SRS in 1985, which is fun. That means that they are the new champion. They finished 1 game ahead of the Lakers, which is the second time that had occurred in the previous 5 years. And this means, of course, that Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar do not win titles in 80, 82, or 85. And as we said, Boston 4 out of the last 6 years. Bird with 4 titles, and Boston just keeps racking them up.
Yeah, thankfully in 1986. Oh, wait, no, Boston won again. 67-15. The same champion that we had in real life. Number 1 in SRS as well at 9.6. Bird has 5 pennants in 7 years. McHale and Parrish, obviously they come to the team now. They get 4 and 5. I mean, the Celtics are the dominant dynasty of this era, of the early 80s. I mean, they are absolutely, the 76ers come in with a couple titles, and the Lakers we're going to talk about here in a bit. They do finally emerge here in the late 80s, but I mean, the early 80s is dominant by Boston. I mean, 5 and 7. This is quite the run for the Celtics.
Absolutely. 1987, the Lakers do finally get their first pennant. 65 wins, 8.31 SRS, first in the league. This is Kareem's first pennant since 1977, so 11 years since he'd had it. Now his 4th overall, and Magic gets the first one of his career in his 8th season. So definitely a huge shift.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, a huge shift for him, in terms of the perception of his career. Instead of getting 1 in his first season and 3 in his first 5 seasons, to wait until 87 to get 1 is, obviously still a great player, but that totally, I think, changed the perception of him and the way that you perceive Magic versus Bird.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point, it's not even a competition. Like, Magic's maybe the guy who, after years of kind of the Jerry West figure of this, where it's like after years of suffering, he finally gets his title, versus like the guy that's neck and neck with Bird. Like, Bird is the unquestioned, beast of the 80s, the unquestioned star, and Magic's kind of this like, I don't know, this like tragic figure that just gets really close but just can't do it or whatnot. It's so weird and so interesting. And I wonder, obviously there were times that we've had the entire episode where we talked about Magic requesting a trade and kind of the issues that he had in LA before they started winning or whatnot. This would be a fascinating experiment too, to see if he would be able to kind of hang around through the entire 80s, or if he would go look for greener pastures, like go to Milwaukee or something. I'm going to go to Milwaukee and change their fortunes or whatnot. I mean, it's still, you don't want to leave LA, but like, not winning any of these titles and coming as close as they did every single year too would just be, it'd be fascinating to see in real time. And I think the real guy though, because we're going to talk about it in a bit, and thankfully he starts getting a few more of these, is Kareem though, who just at this point, we're looking at the first pennant since 1977, his fourth overall though, so it's not like he was, but his career feels a little bit different if like he goes, almost the entire 80s, and we'll talk there's obviously the next year, but really it's weird that he's got such a huge gap between winning those, and I wonder what the real reason is. Just I guess the West being a little tougher, or Boston just being a great regular season team. But it's incredible to see the dominance that they've had. Yeah,
and really, honestly, the East was generally the better conference in, because you had Boston, Philly, and Milwaukee, and the Lakers. I mean, the Suns were good for a while. The Rockets were obviously good for a while, but definitely the stronger depth was in the East, especially early on in the decade. So it is kind of interesting that the Lakers underperformed relatively in the, at least compared to the Celtics. The Celtics were, the better regular season team, obviously, throughout here, and only slightly better a few times. So, some of this is very, just if a game or two were different, this would definitely change his exercise a little bit. But it is interesting how they, regular season, the Lakers did not, even though they were first a lot of times, they did not generally perform as well. At least first in the conference, they were not, first overall in the NBA. So diving into 88, the Lakers do repeat, not three in a row. 62 and 20. They were actually third in the SRS in the league. Number one was Boston, which really kind of shocked me in 1988, which was kind of right after the Celtics were really, Bird was aging a little bit, dealing with injuries, McHale the same way. I'm kind of shocked that in 88 that the Celtics had the better SRS than the Lakers did, since we kind of think of the Celtics as being done as championship contenders at this point. And then this is Kareem. We'll play another year, but this is his last championship. 5 pennants instead of 6 rings. So I not really a big change, I guess, in his perception. It's not really going to shift that much with him with that, but that's a slight difference, obviously.
Yeah, we talked about in our first episode that the Milwaukee thing may have went a little bit better because they were way more successful in this exercise than they were in real life, matching up and getting the playoffs with Kareem obviously in the fold, but then not ultimately being able to capitalize and win enough titles. Where in this exercise, they won a few more titles in Milwaukee, so you can kind of say, okay, maybe it's the thing where he would have maybe stayed in Milwaukee. Like I think he probably would have left regardless, but it's just kind of interesting that we're seeing a shift of when all the titles come. A lot more of the titles come in the 70s, and then he kind of catches up in the late 80s. But as opposed to his real career where he kind of spread it out a little bit more. But it's still awesome that he still gets the 5 pennants and 6 rings. I mean, I was a little worried there. By 1986, you're like, oh no, Kareem's not going to get any more titles, but he eventually does get a few there. And the Lakers start to kind of put together a little bit of a run here. It's like, Magic's starting to get his titles. Maybe he's now becoming and emerging as like that secondary star to a Larry Bird. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. 1989, as in real life, the Detroit Pistons win a championship, 63 wins. They were at a 6.24 SRS, which only fourth in the league. Cleveland, number 1 in SRS that season of all teams. Mark Price, and bringing it there. Brad Daugherty, Larry Nance, of course, those guys. But as we'll see with the next season, only one championship for the Bad Boy Pistons.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different here in history. I mean, they win this one, and they don't really win it very dominantly. I'm surprised that SRS number, them being fourth in the league in that. I mean, but again, the wins wise, it's 63 wins. Obviously, they are the most dominant team, and they get their title. But as you said, it's not going to happen for very long because 1990, it is back in Los Angeles. The Lakers with a 63-19 record are the new champions. They have a second in the league in SRS, 6.74. Your number 1 team is Phoenix. Pops up there for, I believe, one of the first times, or at least the first time in quite a while there for Phoenix. Lakers earned back a title that they lost in the early 80s. So, an interesting way to kind of look at this is one that they in real life obviously lost, and here they get it back, so it's kind of a cool thing there. Magic gets 3 pennants for his career versus 5 rings, because this is gonna be it for the Lakers and it for Magic. Falls short of Bird in that standard, but still a pretty good career there for 3 pennants, especially in the late 80s. But as we said, it kind of changes the dynamic a little bit, whereas he doesn't feel like he's neck and neck with Bird throughout the 80s, but maybe he catches up at the end of it, and people regard him as okay, maybe it looked like he was going to be a guy that flamed out, or he just didn't quite get it done. But by the late 80s, he does get done a few times this year, or the few times in his career. And then interesting, we mentioned Phoenix there, first in SRS, but they were 7th in win-loss percentage. How does that happen? What's old Cotton Fitzsimmons?
Yeah.
He was a coach there, right? Cotton Fitzsimmons at that time? Right?
He was, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
what the hell is he doing out there? I mean, you can't do that. Like, what was their expected win-loss? They were supposed to be 59 and 23, and they were 55 and 27. What are you doing, Cotton? Come on, man.
That's it's a little crazy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's Kevin Johnson, Tom Chambers, Jeff Hornacek, Dan Marley. Really good team. And they actually beat the Lakers, beat them 4-1 that year. That was the first time the Lakers lost in the had not made the finals in a long time, so that was a real shock. But so that team definitely had a lot of talent, despite being the record underdog at that point. But
I blame Armin Gilliam. Armin Gilliam seems like I blame him. So that seems like a.
I blame Mike McGee personally, but whatever.
Yeah, it's
Mike
true.
McGee, yeah,
it's a really good man. I'm looking at this team. This team is awesome. I wish there was more stuff in there. You got Chambers, as you said, Chambers, KJ, Hornacek, Eddie Johnson, Dan Marley. Even the bench guys are pretty cool. You got Tim Perry, a guy we've talked about before, Kurt Rambis coming off the bench, Andrew Lang, who was pretty fun too. So yeah, damn,
good team. Yes. Going to 1991, your new champion, the Portland Trailblazers, preventing the Bulls from winning a championship by having the better regular season record of 63 wins. They actually were second to the Bulls in SRS with 8.47. That's still incredibly high. So Clyde Drexler gets his championship.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Nice. Their second ever regular season championship, 13 years after their first, since they won in 78 in our exercise. So Jordan and the Bulls, the rise to the top of the NBA is delayed. Portland beats the Bulls by 2 games, and Danny Ainge gets another championship since he was on this
his way
team.
in there, baby.
Yeah. So
kiss the rings, kiss the rings, Jason. Kiss
that's
the
like
rings.
5 for him, isn't it?
I think it is.
Yeah. That's right.
I don't think he's all the way done either. I think he might get another one.
That's very sad. All right. Well, maybe you should take the next one while I prepare myself for that. Yeah.
Well, you contemplate life. Well, 1992, the Jordan dynasty finally begins. The Bulls finally have their title. Jordan's first pennant. They win 67 games. They are first in SRS at 10.07. This is a very good team in real life and in our exercise as well. Bulls finally make good on the rise of Jordan, and the Chicago era begins. Or does it? We'll talk about that in a bit. First ever championship for the Bulls franchise as well. And what's interesting, the Bulls just barely squeaked by here. They won the championship by the pennant, I should say, by a mere 10 games. 10 games. The next closest was Cleveland at 57 wins. So yes, the Chicago Bulls team, good, very, very good.
Yeah, extraordinarily deep team. The able to do that, obviously with Pippen and Grant and all the great role players they were able to have. B.J. Armstrong, John Paxson. 93, the Bulls fail to repeat because the Phoenix Suns have your best record of 62 and 20. And actually, they were third in SRS to the Sonics. So not even the best SRS team, but they do get the best record. Of course, this is Charles Barkley's first year there. He gets his elusive ring. And as you mentioned, Danny Ainge gets another one.
Danny winner. All-time great winner, Danny Ainge. I mean, it's unquestioned.
I mean, so.
There's nobody better in NBA history than Danny Ainge at this point. I mean,
better than Michael Jordan, who only had 1 ring at this point.
Exactly. So, that guy's a loser. Danny got to get on Danny Ainge's level, man. What, 6? I think we have for him right now. So
right. Yeah. The Bulls win. Yeah. The Bulls win 10 fewer regular season games. They're third in the league behind the Suns and the Knicks. And yes, the Suns Like in 1990, they significantly outperformed their expected win-loss that year.
Yeah, so we mentioned a few years ago where Phoenix, they should have won 58 games and won 54. I forget the exact numbers, or 55 or whatever. Here they outperformed very well what they were expected to do. They were expected to win only 57 games, and they won 62. The Bulls were expected to win 58 games and won only 57. So not a huge difference, but they finished where they would with a few extra wins, and that was kind of the difference between back-to-back titles for the Bulls and kind of a blip in the radar for the early 90s, because we're going to talk in a bit, but that's it for Jordan and the Bulls for a while. Obviously, in real life, he departs, does his first retirement, and this is that first era of the Bulls, and they got one title with Jordan. That's it. It was a dominant title, and they looked great doing it, but that's it for them until we'll pick them up, in a little bit here. But how does that change a little bit of the dynamics of a Michael Jordan here? Like, he loses to Portland, he loses to Phoenix. He's got his one title, but I don't know. I mean, it's not really it's not the same idea. The aura of Jordan isn't quite there.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, you have that three-peat that so much feeds into dominance, and he's obviously just as great of a player without it. But still, that obviously changes a lot of things about what we consider about Jordan, about him being in a lot of people's mind the unquestionable greatest player ever. I think it changes a lot of that stuff. I mean, he still certainly has a strong argument, and it's gonna later on he's gonna build on that argument, but it definitely shifts the tide for sure.
Absolutely. Also, we should mention the Suns. This is their first championship as well. So the franchise finally gets a ring after many, many years of suffering. Yes,
indeed. So 1994, your Seattle Sonics, 63-19. They, of course, a new championship is crowned. And they did not have their championship of the 70s, so finally they get it in 94, of course, led by Sean Kemp, Gary Payton, and Detlef Schrempf. They were pretty. It was pretty dominant performance. 63 wins. The next closest was Houston at 58. The Suns dropped to 56, and the Bulls still won 55, but fell obviously with the absence of Michael Jordan. And the expected win was 64 for the Sonics, so they were only one game under that. They were first in SRS, second in offensive rating, and third in defensive rating. So, pretty crazy how dominant they were in the regular season, which made the fact that they lost to the Denver Nuggets in the first round, really, really wild. I mean, this wasn't just they weren't fluky at all in being that first seed. They were very dominant that season. So the fact that they happened to lose to a pretty mediocre team with great defensive players as a big man, it was wild.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this a little bit we did an episode, I think about a year or so ago, where we talked about, the number 2 team of the 90s. Like, we know the Bulls are the best team of the 90s or whatever, but who's that number 2? And we made a pretty big argument for Seattle doing that. And this is a year that we point to. It's like, they lost and it was huge and it was one of the biggest upsets in NBA and maybe even sports history, because this team was great. Like, this team had all of the makings to make a huge run, maybe make an NBA Finals, maybe win a title as well, especially with Jordan out of the league and Houston, still, and Houston was a great team, obviously, and we talked about them, winning, 58 games or whatnot, but it felt like Seattle. I mean, that's, first in SRS, second in offense, third in defense. Like, this is an all-time great team, a team that feels like they should have made a gigantic playoff run, may make it to the Western Conference Finals, maybe make it to the NBA Finals, and they're out in the first round, which is just nuts to think about, and a huge, a whole giant change of the guard if things go a little bit different here, and Seattle does not fall to the Nuggets in that first round. I mean, just so much of history, I think, could change. I mean, it would be a really, really dramatic difference here. But I should say, speaking of dramatic differences, 1995, a brand new champion, the San Antonio Spurs, 62-20. They're fourth in our SRS, though, at 5.9. Number 1 team in SRS is Seattle, so no huge hangover for Seattle. They're right back there in 1995, but of course they do not win a title. Again, they don't go back to back. And we always kind of talk about on the show that the Spurs dynasty, the quote dynasty, however you want to clarify it, and we've also have an episode on that of how you kind of clarify a dynasty. It began much earlier than the Tim Duncans and the, from everybody kind of looks at, Tim Duncan gets drafted, the Twin Towers, him and Robinson, and then obviously you bring in Ginobili and Parker, and that starts kind of the quote unquote dynasty. This team was great before that, and this shows it as well. By 1995, they're already winning, pennants here. David Robinson leads the upstart Spurs. This is the first pennant for the Spurs as well. Spurs, really close to the Utah Jazz. Utah has 60 wins this year. San Antonio, of course, with 62. Phoenix, the champions of 1995, they make a case as well. They kind of pop back up here, getting 59 wins. But of course, San Antonio too much to put down there at 62. Robinson wins MVP and leads the Spurs to top 5 finishes in offensive rating and defensive rating, despite having the league's 4th best SRS, as we mentioned. An executive, Greg Popovich, gets his first title as well. Executive, not coach, executive.
Yeah.
Greg Popovich, which I always find very weird and interesting. But yes, he is an executive, and he gets his first ring and maybe his last. Well, little teaser there.
Yeah, right. 1996, Michael Jordan, first full season back with the Bulls, and of course, you go 72-10, you're probably going to win the pennant,
Yes.
and they absolutely do. So 1180 SRS, they get their second championship of the 90s, breaks a streak of 3 straight championships won by the Western Conference, and Seattle, who in most years 64 wins would certainly be a good chance of winning a pennant, but 8 games behind the Bulls, and their record-breaking regular season win total. And the Bulls, they were first in offensive rating, they were first in defensive rating, and by far first in SRS. It was pretty much a blowout.
Yeah, that's no real debate here for anybody. It's the Bulls.
Yes. And 97, once again, the Bulls, not too much of a fall off there, 69 wins and 10.7 SRS. And then, finally, this Jordan guy, we knew that he could win one, but could he win back-to-back titles? Well, yes, he can. He can win back-to-back pennants. The Jazz, they're 5 games back at 64 wins. Again, and most years would have certainly done that. The Bulls failed to win 70 back-to-back, but, that's still a pretty good consolation prize. The Heat were the best team the second best team in the Eastern Conference with 61 wins, and the Bulls not quite as dominant from 96, but they were first in offensive rating, 4th in defensive rating, and again first in SRS.
What happened to defense, guys? Come on, Jesus.
I know, fell off.
These lazy bums. You win 72 games.
Yeah.
It's hard to motivate these guys again. They only win 69 this time, which is, it's nice, but it's not enough there. And then 4th in defensive rating. Jeez,
right. Yeah,
come on, Dickie Simpkins, let's go.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right.
Luke Longley, you bum. All right. 1998, we have a tie. Oh, that's quite fitting here. We'll talk about this in a bit. Chicago and Utah, both 62-20. Sorry, Jazz fans. The Bulls with a 7.24 SRS beat the tiebreaker, which, oh, geez. That's so fitting given how this finals ended, unfortunately, here. Jordan still manages to get the second 3 in a row there. And, he doesn't get the first. He ends with 4 pennants, though, obviously, before he did not win one as a member of the Wizards. We'll just we'll spoil it there for you a little bit earlier. So this is it for Jordan. I know he comes back, but I unfortunately the Wizards did not win a pennant in the early 2000s here. But so 4 for Jordan. How does that sort of change the dynamics there? Because I think I don't know if it changes a ton because he comes back from the second retirement and just dominates in a lot of ways. But without that first 3 in a row, that's I don't know. It's certainly different.
Right. You're going to I think Jordan's takes a little bit of a hit, and I think Bird's raises a lot because of the dominance there. I mean, Bird ends up with more rings in his career than Jordan, which, is just a completely different kind of vibe. And I think it now, instead of, Jordan being ahead above these other guys who are kind of considered in that club, I think he's now right there among those guys, and still maybe the favorite in a lot of people's minds, but I don't think it's quite as strong. I think the fact that he ended his career on such a strong note, I think certainly, boosts things, but I think that it's definitely, it's definitely a little bit lower for sure.
Right. Some other stuff about this 1998 thing. Needs to win a tiebreaker, of course, to do it, which I said is very fitting given how the finals ended with the dramatic shot. But Jordan does get it done. And right on the heels of the Bulls, Seattle still alive there with 61 wins. The Lakers also as well. Kind of interesting. People forget that this team was pretty good as well at 61 wins. So one of the tightest races we've seen in years. I mean, there's obviously a tiebreaker there at 62, and then right on the heels are Seattle and the Lakers. So kind of interesting to see that. A lot of dominance out west as well with those 3 teams. Just really making good cases as well. But that would have been pretty fun. But the Bulls stick to history here and get the dominant team of the late 90s. But a little change in the 90s. But we're going to move on and get to the modern years, quote unquote.
Yes, right. Starting the millennial. Well, first we get 1999, of course, the lockout season. And we have a tie at 37-13. We have the Spurs and the Jazz, and the Spurs win the SRS tiebreaker 7.12. And then, of course, in the actual NBA, this felt like the beginning of a new dynasty. Of course, the Spurs had won a title in 95, but it's obviously a different feel with Robinson getting back to the promised land with his new twin tower, Tim Duncan, and now Popovich gets a pennant as a coach instead of just as GM. And yeah, the Jazz, it's really rough for them. They lose 2 back-to-back tiebreakers. The franchise still does not get a championship either way. We look at pennants or we look at NBA titles. They don't get it there. And this, of course, being the lockout season, the race was very close. The Trailblazers were right behind them with 35 wins. Indiana had 33 wins, so that's that's tight. And the championship goes back to the West after 3 years in the East with Chicago.
Yeah, it's going to be a while, unfortunately, until it goes back east because
yes.
2000, we have the Lakers back at it. Same champion that we had in real life. They have 6-7 wins. They're first in SRS at 8.41. So, yeah, only one ring for Kobe and Shaq together, though. A little bit of a spoiler there, which I think is pretty interesting. The West makes it 2 in a row. And a pretty dominant win for the Lakers this year. They're 8 games better than the next contender, Portland, who is interesting. They always seem to be in the mix here. We always kind of mention Portland, but ever since that title in 1992, or the pennant in 1992, I should say, they haven't really, obviously haven't made it all the way to the top there, but they're always kind of in the mix there. As far as the Lakers, though, they were first in SRS, first in defensive rating, and 5th in offensive rating. And Phil Jackson gets his first title as a member of the Lakers, and his 5th title overall, obviously combining those, his run with the Bulls and now this run with the Lakers. So, but interesting there for only the one for Shaq and Kobe. A little bit of a spoiler there to give you some new champions coming up in the next few years, but I find that very interesting as well.
Yeah, and we get to the next. Dethroning the Lakers are the Spurs at 58-24, first in SRS. David Robinson is going to later retire with 3 rings. Another spoiler, but different years than he won them in real life. And yeah, also similar to the real life Spurs is that they have trouble getting championships in a row. They're going to win them intermittently throughout the years here, but there's going to be the knock on their quote unquote dynasty is the fact that they never put them back to back, or you didn't kind of stretch them over a long period of time. But again, also had regular season excellence for a long period of time, but rarely first, more usually second or so. The Lakers in real life, they were the real life champs. They were 3rd with 56 wins. Philadelphia also 56 wins that year, which kind of surprised me. I always thought of the Lakers as such a heavy favorite in that series, but in terms of record, they actually were identical with the Sixers. And the Spurs were a top defensive team, which tends to be a theme with these pennant winners. They tend to be number 1 in defense. They were 6th in offensive rating, first in SRS, and their expected win-loss was 63 wins, so 58, definitely an underperformance, but it makes the fact that they had the real-life sweep in the conference finals against the Lakers, a little bit disappointing, just given the fact that they seemed like a team that should have been more competitive with the Lakers, but again, I think probably the Lakers underperformed a little bit that season because of Shaq being out for a certain period of time and that kind of thing. After winning that first title, the Lakers definitely took the brakes off in the regular season.
Yeah, and that was kind of a common theme with them as well, and that's why you only get obviously the one title with Kobe and Shaq or whatnot, and in some ways, we see that with the Spurs as well, and we're going to go throughout the history and look at them. I mean, they're a team that now has, especially in the last few years of Duncan, made it obvious that they were like not intentionally trying to win the most games in the regular season, and instead kind of holding things up for the playoffs or whatnot. So that changes the history a little bit, but hey, it's the advantage of these other teams to rise up and win these pennants when the champions, the incumbent champions, get lazy here. But taking a look at a new timeline here, I like this timeline a lot of how these 2000s play out, because 2002, the Sacramento Kings, yay, they get their title. Weber, Peja, Vlade, Bibby and company, they get their ring. 61-21, 7.61 SRS. So I mean, they're a worthy champion for sure. The franchise's 5th championship. Go, jeez, look at this Sacramento. Things are, everybody laughs at Sacramento, but they're a pretty good team there. But we're celebrating another Kings franchise championship. The banners. The history. I mean, this is a charter organization in the league now, right?
Yeah, first one in Sacramento, first one for the actual Kings versus the Royals. But yes, but nevertheless, first in 45 years or so. So that's but yeah, that definitely we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get through the numbers. But it's definitely a huge shift, both in how this individual team is perceived. They're the classic, almost got there but didn't quite get there behind the Lakers, and now the franchise as a whole and the team of this season get seen as a whole new light because of what happened here.
Yeah, this is an awesome change, too. I mean, nothing against the Lakers, but I think, we all kind of... I mean, I always rooted for this, and I think most people listening to this, unless you're a Lakers fan, well, that would have been pretty sweet for the Kings to win it. But Rick Adelman, he picks up another ring after winning one in Portland all those years ago, so pretty good for him. The actual champion Lakers, they're pretty close. They have 58 wins, but the Kings have a great case, thanks to their great offense, one of the best in the league, and an underrated defense as well. They were 6th in defensive rating, so always an idea because they played fast. And that was in the days when, if you gave up 100 points, you're like, these teams no good. They're not good at defense. And it's like, no, but we're fast and we're scoring a lot. So it took a little while. It was not until really the post D'Antoni Suns years where people realized you can give up a lot of points and it doesn't matter if you score a lot of points. And it took a little while for people to kind of get that. But defensive rating does a good job of showing that. And the Kings, a pretty good defense per 100 possessions. So they're 6th in defensive rating. And yeah, pretty cool that they get their title here. And I even like more how this 2003 plays out.
Yeah, this is 2003. We have a tie for best record, the Dallas Mavericks and San Antonio Spurs at 60-22, but the Mavericks win the SRS tiebreaker. So Dirk Nowitzki, early on in his career, gets his first championship. And the Spurs, they come close to doing every other year type deal, but they fall to the upstart Mavericks in this season. And this really shifts a lot of different things. And I think it's interesting because Dirk's championship in 2011 and the Mavericks, that came after so much heartbreak and so many close calls with the Mavericks and so much angst that when that moment finally happened, it was really special for a lot of reasons because of all that pain. But here it happened so quickly in his career. Doesn't have the chance to have that a tough time. And this is definitey, this was not a particularly strong defensive team, but they had a lot of weapons. Of course, Michael Finley, Nick Van Exel, a lot of fun guys on this team. A lot of another team that kind of obviously we think of the 7 seconds or less Suns as the one that heralded the stylistic change, but these Mavericks and those Kings teams, kind of were the initial fuel for that, and then it kicked up a notch definitely once 7 seconds or less. And speaking of that, Steve Nash gets his first championship as well on this team as well. Can't forget him, of course. Really important part of this team as well.
Yeah, and the Kings, the defending champion Kings, this is a nice little ring to it. They finished 2nd in SRS, but only have 59 wins, so they fall here, one back of title contention. Also fitting that they lost to Dallas in the Western Conference Semis this year as well, Sacramento, so kind of works pretty well there. But this is a nice little change of NBA history, and like you said, that 2011 title just feels so much more different, and we'll see if they can hold up their end of the bargain in 2011 here in this exercise. But we got another new champion here in 2004. The title's finally back in the East because the Indiana Pacers, baby, 61-21. They are 5th in the league in SRS, though, this year. San Antonio, number 1 in SRS, but Indiana does it. Reggie with a late career title. I mean, this is totally different, and imagine as well, because obviously there's some circumstances that would come the following year, but imagine how differently we think of guys like a Jermaine O'Neal, even a Ron Artest, even a Steven Jackson. All 4 of those guys, Reggie and O'Neal and Artest and Jackson, I mean, they feel so much more different if they just get this title in 2004, especially Reggie, I think, as well, because it's just the culmination of what's been a pretty good career, and the whole things surrounding him would just be totally different as well. And then Jermaine O'Neal is kind of the upstart young superstar, gets a title here pretty early as kind of the leader of this team, and Artest is kind of the backbone of defensively. I mean, it's totally cool to see kind of, the difference here. And I remember this as well. And I think I mentioned this on the show before. I really love this team. I thought this team, in real time as I was watching them, I felt like this is a team that's going to just shock the world and win the title or whatnot. It obviously didn't happen this year. And then the next year, what was so disappointing is because the Malice came, and it's just oh man, they had built up such a good team, and it's such a solid base and all that sort of stuff. And then obviously the Malice and the Palace happened, and some heartbreak with that involved, and it just kind of all came crumbling right away. But yeah, they get the title here in 2004, and that's just a totally different vibe for Reggie Miller, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And Jermaine O'Neal too. I mean, people kind of forget that he was like a top 5 MVP candidate for a year or two. I mean, he was really he was kind of in that elite company. It was a relatively short time, and he kind of fell off later on in his career. Was more of a journeyman, but he was definitely of the guys who were most affected by what happened there. I mean, not necessarily reputation wise, but just like their career was like way different after it happened. I feel like O'Neal may have had the biggest effect of anyone, with a deep involvement in that brawl, maybe more than Artest and Steven Jackson had.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think he's unfortunately a guy kind of lost to history because, he never was able to kind of get back, in terms of like win shares and value replacement. I mean, there was a year, 2003, he has a 10.5 win shares. The next year he has a 9. And then he could just never really get back there. I mean, obviously the Malice in the Palace year, he misses half the season. He only has a 3.8 win shares. And then he's just like perpetually kind of injured, and he never gets over 5. I don't think it's he did 1 year in Miami, he got over 5, but I mean then we're talking already he's already kind of bounced to Miami, then he did he was in Boston for a few years, which I barely remember, and then Phoenix, and then like his 1 year in the Warriors. He became, like as you said, kind of the journeyman, and it's fascinating to see how much different his career may have been if they win this title, and then maybe the Malice thing doesn't happen or whatnot, but just totally different dynamic here with Indiana. Larry Bird gets a ring as an executive as well. So Larry Bird racking up the rings there. Rick Carlisle doesn't have to wait another decade to cement his legacy because he gets a ring here as well. And Indiana really overperformed their expected win-loss percentage or win-loss record this year. They were expected to have 58 wins. They have 61. I did mention as well that Indiana 5th in SRS, which is interesting. They're behind the Spurs, the Timberwolves, the Kings, and the actual real-life champions, the Detroit Pistons, as well in SRS. And as we mentioned too, the East finally takes back the title after 5 straight wins out west.
And but it's not going to last long because 2005, the West is going to take it back. The Phoenix Suns with 62-20, 708 SRS. They were second in the league to the Spurs. The Spurs keep getting these SRS titles, but not having the best record. Steve Nash, 2 rings on 2 different teams. I guess it's vindication for Mike D'Antoni that 7 seconds or left, it does produce championships.
Yeah, could win in the playoffs. Yeah,
right, absolutely. Or the regular season. That's what
matters.
Right.
So, our playoffs, the regular season, of course. Yeah.
Right, exactly. The regular season are the playoffs. It's confusing, but it doesn't matter. However, the Suns were 17th in defensive rating, so not above average here, but they are so far ahead of everybody in offensive rating that it didn't particularly matter. They were second in SRS, surprisingly, as the Spurs made a run at it, but couldn't come up with the exact number of wins, fall slightly behind the Suns that year. Dallas also was very strong that year. It was a pretty tight race for the regular season championship. And then, the fact is that, younger Amari Stoudemire, Joe Johnson, even Sean Marion have, get a championship all relatively early in their career. And Jim Jackson at the end of his career gets a nice little ring Jackson too. So, there you go. So he known for something other than getting traded all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if Robert Sarver's not cheap and actually re-signed Joe Johnson, but I'm sure he's probably cheap. I'm going to guess that history could not make Robert Sarver not cheap. So I'm sure he sold Rajon Rondo still for $1 million, and then traded or didn't sign Joe Johnson because he was cheap. Yeah, so I'm sure that probably still happened, even though it worked out okay in real life, some of those moves. But the Roosters came, it eventually came to bite them in the ass, and now Phoenix is Phoenix. So.
No matter how many parallel universes that we end up having throughout the entire galaxy, all of them have ISO Joe. So they all
lead to Mike Woodson crossing his arms and Joe Johnson dribbling for 20 seconds of a shot clock in Atlanta. It was just we had to have that.
We did. Destiny. We absolutely had to have that. That's what we had. There's no way of avoiding that. No matter what we do, no matter how we try to change the timeline, it's not going to happen. So. We probably should move on.
The good old days of ISO Joe. Anyway, I have a fun story. I'm gonna tell you off air a fun story about Joe Johnson as well. But anyway,
nice.
It's good. I can't tell that because I'm revealing I think very personal information. That's a terrible tease. I should have just not said anything and just told you out of that. But maybe one day I'll bring up the story. But anyway, 2006 here. What a tease. What a terrible tease. What a terrible podcast host. 2006, the Detroit Pistons. All right, so they didn't do it a few years ago, but they did it this year. Interestingly enough, in 2006, a new champion. Of course, they win 64 games this year. They're second in SRS to San Antonio. If you guys just really tried a little bit harder, win a few more games in the regular season. Like the Spurs are the team. They're coming at like 15 championships at this point, but they keep screwing it up. They're always in SRS, but never in record. Detroit wins the title with Flip Saunders. This is Ben Wallace's last season with the Pistons until he'd, of course, say, I'm going to move bigger and better things with the Chicago Bulls. I'm going to go see what Scott Skiles is cooking there in Chicago. But it took a few years. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, it sounds like it's really going to work out well. It took a few years, of course, to match up, but Detroit does get the ring with the obviously the Rip Hamilton, the Chauncey Billups, the Rasheed Wallace mini dynasty, Tayshaun Prince, we should mention as well. It was not quite the crazy upset of the Big Four Lakers, but done with dominance, though, at 64 wins. Spurs, once again, as we said, make a run at it with 63 wins, but unfortunately do not top the Pistons, who are 4th in offensive rating and 5th in defensive rating, too. So, it's kind of an interesting thing, too. I think we always remember the Detroit Pistons as being, a team that just mucked it up or whatnot and was great at defense. They were good at offense, too. I mean, they weren't, like, the most exciting offense, and the league wasn't very exciting at this point either, but, they were 4th in offensive rating for whatever that is worth. An actual champion, Miami, is not even in the picture. They finished 5th in the league at 52 wins, so they're just a non-factor completely in this.
Yeah. 2007, the Dallas Mavericks win their second championship, 67 wins, 728 SRS, second in the league to the Spurs. You guessed it, the Spurs again.
They would be so good. Jeez.
Yes, that's the 5th year in a row that they. The 4th year in a row that they managed to have the SRS crown, but not have the best record. So, yes, and Dirk's second and last championship. That changes a lot for him, I think, because he has more rings, but the fact that I think the way that he won it and the fact that they toppled the Big Three Heat in such a memorable way, I think actually. I think this way of winning it, even though it's more championships, I think it hurts him in a way because the story's not nearly as exciting or good.
It's not that like kind of movie-esque, like, oh my god, after years of heartbreak and people making fun of him and the no D and Dirk and all that sort of stuff. And then it's not only the Mavs winning that title in 2001 and Dirk finally after years and years and years of going for it, and even guys like Kidd and stuff like that was just a remarkable team in terms of the guys that were able to go on that team and make it all work. But the fact that they did it against like the Heat. The team that like collabed to like come together and destroy the NBA, and like the Mavericks are the ones that like save the NBA from the heat, the virus of the heat. Like that's how it really. I mean, people kind of lose that to time because now people have kind of softened it a bit. But I mean, there was vitriol towards. I mean, I don't have to tell you, but like not only LeBron, but just that Heat team in general. Like people could not wait. So like Dallas not only wins the title and defeats the Heat, but they become like the de facto like America's team. Like everybody was rooting for the Mavericks. Everybody wanted to see somebody knock them off. Everybody wanted to see Dirk get his one title. So yeah, there was so much like story to that 2011 thing. And then this time it's like, hey, just wins 2 titles. Good team, good player. Like I don't know, it does. Yeah, it does. Even though he would have that one more ring, it just doesn't feel as triumphant as it would have, or how it is in real life, I should say.
Yeah, and 2006 with the Pistons is, I guess, a little bit of the same because the fact that they, as you talked about, beating the Lakers and basically ending that dynasty, in an upset in a series, more memorable than what would have happened here. Obviously, I guess you're taking out the playoffs out of the equation. You're lacking the playoff. It would be interesting to look at what we might remember in the regular season because it would change kind of the whole things. I mean, obviously the moments in the regular season would matter more, but we wouldn't necessarily know it at the time. It would become if it were the end of the season and there's you're in a race and 2 teams are close and one wins an important late season game. The importance of that is understood at the time, but something that happened earlier in the season that later became very important wouldn't always be known. So it obviously changed the thinking on a lot of levels.
Yeah, no, it's a fun one there. But now we move on to 2008. Same champion, the Boston Celtics at 6-6 and 16, 9.3 in SRS, tops in the league as well. Boston's really the unquestioned champion here, both in real life and in our pennant exercise here, and they deserved it. First in the league in SRS, propped up by the league's #1 defense. Also 10th in offensive rating, but I mean the league's #1 defense in a lot of ways. I mean they were a great team, of course,
by a mile.
Yeah, and of course the Garnett, Allen, Pierce, the big 3 there get their title. Garnett obviously gets a title finally. Ray Allen, I believe, his first title as well, and then Paul Pierce, of course, his first title. And the what is it? The 7th now for Danny Ainge. Now he gets one as an executive too. So,
oh boy, too many.
But I think Boston's. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just saying, I don't like this anymore. I don't think we should do this anymore.
This is the end of this. Okay. Anyway,
we made a mistake.
Yeah, this is a terrible timeline. I need to delete this and never have it happen again.
Yes.
Boston's first title since 1986 as well. So they're back on the leaderboards there with Boston. But there's a new champion emerging from the East that we're going to talk about here in a sec.
Yeah, 2009. We Cleveland Cavaliers, 66 wins, also first in SRS with 8.68. LeBron gets his title and doesn't have to go to South Beach to do it. He manages to do it in Cleveland, and this team, I think, gets lost a little bit in terms of how great this team was. You don't have a lot of teams that win 66 or more games, but part of it is obviously because it's a great team because of LeBron James and the surrounding cast. Some good players here. You got some Mo Williamses, you got your Zydrunas Ilgauskis, but you obviously don't have that second all-star type player that I guess Mo Williams was like an all-star one time, but like a perennial all-star, awesome sidekick type thing. And the fact that they were upset by a really forward-thinking Orlando Magic team, with a 4-out kind of stretch offensive style, they definitely were a team that was capable of winning a championship. I mean, they were good enough, and I don't think they necessarily were, constructed. They weren't flawlessly constructed, but they weren't like a flawed team. They had some pretty good, role players around there. They were, a really good defense. They were, they were third in the league in defensive rating, fourth in offensive rating, so they were a really good balanced team. Yeah. They just happened to, run into the wrong opponent at the right time.
Yeah, this is a team that I always wonder that even if they had made the finals, like things would have been a little bit different. Like I don't know that they would have been able to beat the Lakers, like Orlando, obviously went up against the Lakers and didn't really stand much of a chance either. And that might have happened in Cleveland as well because like you said, the second best players like Mo Williams, who, Mo Williams is good, but it's like, oh geez, like that's going to be tough. Like, but LeBron was so good at this point too, at only 24 years old that like you almost can construct a narrative in your mind where he just goes out there and just dominates, the Lakers and wins a title, almost single-handedly, which would totally change, the perception of LeBron in a lot of ways. And yeah, this is a team that like we did get kind of robbed of like a Kobe LeBron, finals because Orlando was so good and so kind of forward thinking in that sense. And that's, if you go back and watch those games, you'll see like, oh God, like they're ahead of the game in a lot of ways in terms of, Dwight Howard being the lone big man. And then, your Anderson, or Rashard Lewis at like your 4, raining threes, Turkoglu playing the power forward, raining threes, like just a lot of great stuff going on there in Orlando. And it's just kind of one of the fun teams. But, anyway, we change history. We get the Kobe Shaq, maybe possibly, here, or we just get Cleveland with their win and LeBron doesn't go to Miami and everything's all well or whatever. But yeah, Cleveland wins with the top SRS, as you said, the 6-6 wins, fourth best offense in the league's third best defense as well. As said, LeBron at age 24 becomes champion. And the good news as well, Cleveland finally gets their first title. So good for old Cleveland there. And they go back to back. 2010, 61 and 21, 6.17 in SRS. So they're second in the league to Orlando, which is interesting that Orlando does it there. 2 rings for LeBron, back to back for him. This year they have the league's second best SRS, the 6th best offense, and the 7th best defensive rating. So pretty cool there. And I think the real thing that we're going to want to talk about here is that Kobe does not win another title, and he only has 1 ring. Jason, the narratives. What do you do?
I know, and we didn't really talk about it either. But Shaq, that leaves him with only 1 in his. Well, you know what? I take that back because he not win a championship with the Cavs in 2010. So that's his 2nd ring.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I didn't even think about that until just now. But that's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, but I think it's bigger for Kobe. I think because he's judged on a bigger level. He's judged more for the rings, I think, than Shaq is. I mean, they're part of his legacy, but I think it changes more for Kobe because that's so much about like his argument and his persona and all that sort of thing. And yeah, the fact that he would only have 1 for his career, that's definitely that changes a lot of things. That's definitely a huge difference, I think, in how he's perceived versus the 5 championships. That whole army of people who want to put him in the top tier of all time players. That's a huge part of the argument. And there's other stuff there too. Obviously, tremendous scorer, tremendous all around player. But that's a huge one. That's going to shift a lot of narratives. That's for sure.
And LeBron at age 25 now with 2 titles. He's kind of building up a little bit of a mini dynasty there in Cleveland. But it is broken up by the team of my heart, Jason. 2011 and 2012 back-to-back champions. Your Chicago Bulls, baby. Tom Thibodeau, all those wins, racking up all those wins and making everybody die in the regular season was worth it because he wins back-to-back titles. I used to joke with my friends, like, because I was of, like, I'm the school of Popovich. Like, who the hell cares, man? Rest up your guys. Like, let's see what we can do in the playoffs. Not Tom Thibodeau, man. Tom Thibodeau wanted to win every single game like it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals. And it pays off in our exercise, baby, because 2011, they win 62 games. They're second in SRS to Miami, but we get a new champion there. They topple the Heat. And then they go back-to-back. They win the next year as well at 50-16 is obviously the lockout shortened season, but they are first in SRS that year at 7.43, so they really earn it there in that second year. But yeah, Bulls first title since 1998, and they become I think a bit of a different franchise as well with now two different title runs. It's not only the Jordan years that everybody kind of looks back on, but now they've done it again, post Jordan and with a totally different crop of guys, and with obviously Tom Thibodeau who won a few years prior with Boston Celtics as kind of their defensive specialist. Now he goes to Chicago and wins two titles here. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff that comes up with this, and I like this exercise again. Yes, sure, maybe Danny Ainge got a lot of titles, but my Thibodeau Bulls got 2 titles, so that's all that matters, baby.
All right, well, Rich, if you're happy, I'm happy, and yeah, the edging there, the Spurs managed to lose another attempt at a championship because of, in this case, it's tiebreaker. They were only 0.15 difference in SRS between the number 1, number 2 teams, which I think is the closest we've ever had one of these tiebreakers, but both having the same record, but the Bulls getting it. I don't want to talk about what it means for a certain Bulls legacy, but we can talk about anybody else. Obviously Kirk Heinrich, it's going to mean a lot there.
Oh yeah, I don't know. He's an all-time winner now. I mean, he is the scrappiest winner of all time at this point.
Yeah, Joakim Noah. A lot of good players for the Bulls.
Yeah,
there.
Well, I mean, Derrick Rose is definitely a guy that you look at too. Like, I mean, it's like holy crap.
That's the guy. Yeah, that's the guy I didn't want to talk about, but. Because of the other Derrick Rose stuff,
Yeah, no, I know, but it definitely does. I mean, this is like, especially at this age. I mean, he is, the youngest MVP in the league, and like that pops up, and then now there's like, holy crap, like this guy. And what's cool too is like we're seeing kind of the young players of the league, the ones that we pegged as the stars, and one obviously became a gigantic superstar, and the other one is Derrick Rose. But like LeBron with his 2 titles at age 24 and 25, and now Derrick Rose before I think even his 25th birthday, he's got 2 titles too. So we're seeing the kind of the young guns of the league sort of emerging here and winning titles, which I think is pretty interesting. And LeBron's not going to be done though.
No, he come back with Miami now. Of course, 2013 He's able to win a pennant with a 66-16 record, a 7.03 SRS, second in the league to OKC, third ring in his career. So he manages to have the same amount, but in a different way, of course, with 2 with Cleveland instead of 2 with Miami, and of course the Cleveland one not in real life coming much more dramatically than it did here. The Heat had the league's second best SRS, but was second in offense, 9th in defense. LeBron, of course, now has titles for 2 different franchises.
Yeah, I guess those, losing those 2 to the Bulls really, it broke him. Like, he wins 2 with Cleveland. Yeah. It's like he's Cleveland's son, but man, those Thibodeau Bulls really pissed him off, and he's like, screw this, I'm going to Miami. Like,
yeah.
Would he be hated more if he won 2 titles and then bounced, or do you think I don't think so. I think that they'd be like, what, we got our 2 titles, we're Cleveland, we'll take anything at this point. Like, it's fine, I feel like he's hated less if he decides, after those 2 years to move on. Because then it's just like he could just be like, I just like warm weather. And they're like, yeah, I mean, you already won 2 titles, man. Go get the warm weather. It's cool. Like, go ride your bike on, Miami Beach or whatever. We'll be fine with that. So I think that would definitely have changed his legacy a lot if he had done that after winning 2 with Cleveland there. But let's move on to 2014 here. The San Antonio Spurs, there we go, baby. They finally got it. 62-20. Kawhi Leonard finally says, hey, can we just freaking win enough games in the regular season, guys? They're tops in SRS as well at 8. So they're the best team in the league in both wins and SRS. Duncan, though, inexplicably ends with 3 rings. He lost 2 to tiebreaker and 4 additional SRS titles. Jeez, man, lazy bum. Just win a few more games in the regular season, man. Come on.
Right, yeah.
Jeez.
Work a little harder.
Yeah. It's a different. I mean, it's still a good legacy. Obviously, 3 rings for Duncan is pretty good. But in our thing, he's like an all-time I don't know. He's an all-time bridesmaid still, because he would have been like, man, you could have won 10 rings, but you instead won only 3 there. But no, otherwise, 2014, Kawhi Leonard gets his first ring. Also, I think this is the most interesting thing: the first ring for Parker and Ginobili, 2014. That's fascinating. They wait all that time to get their 1 ring. So.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And then we go into things are going to sound pretty familiar here.
We can't escape. We tried. We really tried, but you can't. I mean, you can't escape it.
Yeah, Golden State Warriors over the next 3 seasons, pretty much gonna just completely dominate the league. 67 wins the first year, 10.01 SRS, and they reign supreme, all-time great regular season team and a great postseason team with the top SRS, second best offense, first in defense, first in expected win-loss. And then they're gonna get, well, I guess they're not gonna get Kevin Durant quite yet. They're gonna. The next season, 2016, they're going to, of course, win 73 games with actually only slightly better SRS than 10.38. But they don't have the opportunity to blow a 3-1 lead, and they get their second straight pennant and culminate the greatest regular season in history, 73 wins. Again, top SRS, first in offense, fifth in defense, will slip a little bit there, but I guess the first in offense was so tremendous that they
when you're winning by 25, it's fine.
Yeah, right. It is fine, yes. And they actually were not tops in the league in expected win-loss because that went to the Spurs, because the Spurs actually were incredibly great that regular season as well, like 67 wins or something, and really very, very close in SRS, but the Warriors got them slightly for sure.
Yeah, and then 2017. Sorry, we tried it. Just wait though. There's a surprise at the end. There's one good thing that comes of this. The Warriors once again win the title. This is kind of boring. Of course, they went 3 in a row here. It's the first 3 consecutive championship runs since the Bulls did it in 96, 97, 98. So we broke up a little bit of the the Lakers obviously didn't do it in the early 2000s, but the Warriors do it here. But Jason, they're not going to win 4 in a row.
Nope. Not going to happen. Your Houston Rockets, they spoil. We can say the four-peat. That's not trademarked.
We can say four-peat. Yeah, screw you.
Yeah, four-peat. All right. Yeah, exactly. 65 wins, 8.21 SRS, and the league's top offense, 6th best defense. So there you go. You putting the D in D'Antoni for sure. Tops in expected win loss. Both James Harden and Chris Paul get their first championships of their careers. So. It's all glorious in Houston. The Rockets, I believe that's the Rockets' first championship as a franchise as well, because they, of course, didn't get in the Akeem years, which we kind of glossed that over a little bit.
Yeah, right.
94, 95 did not get their championships. So, that changes a lot for Olajuwon's career, I guess, as well. But Harden and Chris Paul get the benefit of finally winning a championship for each of them.
Yeah, Ryan Anderson as well. Long awaited Ryan Anderson.
Huge, yes. Yeah. Well, we've been waiting since those Magic years. So,
exactly, right. Oh, yeah,
right. Yeah, so.
Oh, boy, yes. Yeah. PJ Tucker finally gets the ring. Yeah, that's good. But, so that's interesting. So, finally, somebody breaks up the Warriors here. But this year, I don't know. I haven't looked at the, but I think Golden State probably. We'll see how the things go once the year finally ends up. But, maybe we'll get a new champion this year. We'll have to check in at the end of the year and see how the regular season champion works out. But, fun little exercise there, Jason.
Yes, yeah, definitely fun indeed. And, looking at the overall numbers, by looking at the pennants, there were 46 new champions and 38 were the same champions. So that's more than half, but they're probably, I don't know if I expected this to be significantly different than that, but that seems like the fact that it's more than half, I think, is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, that for that number of things to be a little bit different there, the 46 new champions, really stands out to me. I think I assumed there was going to be a lot more of the same champions. I was stunned that there'd be that many, as you said, the new champions at 46 to 38. Like I really thought it was, as you said, a little closer to 50-50, or maybe even skewing more towards the same champions. But pretty fascinating because when we think of the NBA and kind of the common narrative around the NBA, it's like, it doesn't matter. You know who the best team is every single year. And you might know who's going to win it, or you might have a very good idea of who's going to win the title, and there might be very few, teams that win it. But it's not always the truly dominant regular season team. Sometimes there are teams that pop up out of nowhere and have great runs. And, this year we're looking at a potential of the Denver Nuggets, winning a ring here. And I don't know that anybody is going to seriously put money down for the Nuggets to win, the NBA title or whatever. But, the regular season does kind of matter. And it is kind of fun still to see that experiment and how it sort of plays out. But, I was surprised at the amount of new champions for sure.
Yeah. So looking at the franchises with the biggest amount of changes, if you look at the amount of pennants and rings per franchise, so the Lakers overall, if you include the NBL, they have 18 rings, but only 10 pennants. So they lose 8 out of that, which I think is definitely the biggest change in terms of NBA history. The Celtics, it's similar. It's from 17 rings to 16 pennants, so not a huge change. The Bulls remain the same with 6. The Warriors are 1 less with 5. The Royals Kings franchise with a significant change. They have 5 pennants instead of just the 1 championship in 1951. So that's a big change. Other than that, the changes are largely on the margins. There aren't, of course, most of the teams have not won a significant number of championships more than, there's only a handful of teams that have won more than 3 championships in NBA history. So, only really a few of them are making a difference. The Bulls Wizards franchise has 3 pennants as opposed to 1 ring. The Suns have a couple of pennants. The Nuggets have a couple of pennants. Neither of those teams have won championships. So, a few shifts there, but not really, a lot of, huge change, I guess. I don't know. Anyone stand out to you in terms of the totals?
No, not really. I mean, obviously the Lakers are going to be your number 1 with only 10 pennants, but 18 rings. So I think the legacy of the Lakers changes a little bit. I'm kind of fascinated by the Bulls, with their 6 pennants and 6 rings. So they get to the same way, but obviously in a different method with, the Thibodeau Bulls getting a few of those there. But otherwise it's not too much different. I think the Royals Kings obviously is one that really sticks out. And we talked about it earlier. They have 5 pennants in this exercise, but only 1, of course, real ring. But I think what the real fascinating thing is, unfortunately, the teams that still don't have, didn't have a pennant and didn't have a ring. It's very sad for this the select few group of teams here, but.
Yeah, the Hornets, the Clippers, the Grizzlies, the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, the Magic, the Raptors, and the Jazz all no rings or no pennants. Neither one, unfortunately. The Hawks lose they lose their ring because they did not have any pennants, despite being in the league for more than 60 years. They've never won a regular season pennant. So that's saying something right there.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
It's fitting for sure in a lot of ways. But and among those teams, obviously the Hornets, the Grizzlies, the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, the Magic, the Raptors, the Jazz, and the Clippers. I mean, a lot of those teams all have things in common. Like they're all kind of relatively new teams. So I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's too daunting that oh my god, the Timberwolves never did it. I mean, they were in the mix a few of those years. The Jazz, as we mentioned, were pretty close a few of those years as well. But they do stand out. The Jazz is they were along for a long time and never got one. And the Clippers, of course, as well. A team that had been around for many years and never got a pennant and never sniffed a pennant. But teams like the Hornets and the Grizzlies and the Raptors and the Magic. It's okay, I get it. They've only been in the league, a handful of years, relatively speaking. So I'm not too surprised by that. But the Clippers and the Jazz striking out despite, being around as long as they were is definitely a pretty significant, in addition to, unfortunately, the Hawks, who, they've been around literally since the beginning of the league and they never got there. So,
all right. One of these days. All right. Well, thanks everyone for checking us out. You can find us at The Step Back at fansided.com. You can also find us by looking on Facebook or Twitter at Over and Back NBA. And you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher or pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcast. We are there. If we're not there and you want us to be there, you should just let us know and we'll get on there. So hope everyone has enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you soon.